I'm Marie Thompson, am 26 years old, and I've always been one to keep things under control. My life, my career, my future, everything is planned and structured. I work in tech as a project manager, and I'm good at it. I get things done, I hit my deadlines, and I'm always one step ahead. My days start early, coffee, news, emails, and end late with little room for anything else. People think I'm dedicated, and I guess I am, but to be honest, sometimes it feels more like a treadmill. I've never been one for deep emotional connections. I talk to my mom, Elaine, maybe once a month, but it's always short, always about surface stuff. She tries, but I'm too busy with work to make much time for her. My last relationship ended 2 years ago with Dan, who couldn't handle how much I put my career above everything else. I didn't get it then. Why would anyone expect me to compromise on my future for something as unpredictable as love? I wasn't raised religious. Faith just wasn't part of my world. I see it as a crutch for others, something that distracts from the real work of making progress through technology, data, and logic. The world's changing fast, and I'm keeping up. I don't have time for questions about the meaning of life. I just need to keep moving forward. But as 2023 rolls on, the world feels a little off. The pandemic left a scar, and now I'm hearing whispers about something bigger, some kind of digital mark of the beast connected to the biometric chips being rolled out everywhere. Some people are scared, others see it as the next step toward a safer world. I don't know what to think. I try to focus on my work, but there's this nagging feeling that something is shifting beneath the surface. I tell myself that as long as I stay ahead in my career, I'll be fine. But deep down, there's a small voice asking if there's more to life than just this. I'm not sure how to answer it, and honestly, I don't think I want to. But that's the thing with life. It has a way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect it. It was late October when everything started to change. I was on my way to an important meeting, my mind already a mile ahead of the presentation I had to give. The world was moving fast, and so was I. But that morning, something felt off, like the calm before a storm, the air just a little too still. I couldn't place it, so I pushed the feeling aside. I had work to do. I remember getting into my car, the usual rush of the city around me, the buzz of the world carrying on without a care. I'd barely made it halfway down the highway when I started feeling lightheaded, my vision blurry. First, I thought it was just stress or maybe not enough sleep, but then it got worse fast. I pulled over, my hands shaking. That's when everything went black. I woke up in a hospital room, the beeping of machines around me. But it wasn't the sterile smell or the white walls that hit me first, it was the feeling. The overwhelming sense that something wasn't right. There was a sharp pain in my chest, and the doctors were frantically working around me. My body felt heavy, as though it wasn't entirely mine. And that's when I realized I wasn't sure if I was still alive. I had no idea how long I'd been unconscious, but when the doctors told me I had suffered a heart attack and almost didn't make it, I couldn't process it. Me? Heart attack? Didn't fit with the image I had of myself. I was young, I was healthy, I had a plan. How could this happen? But something else happened during those moments between life and death. I remember it clearly, like a switch flipped in my mind. I wasn't just lying there on a hospital bed anymore. I was outside of my body, hovering above it. There was no pain, no panic, just silence. I watched the doctors move around me, their faces frantic, but I wasn't scared. I was strangely calm. And then I heard it, an undeniable voice, not from the doctors, but from somewhere deeper inside me. A whisper, soft but insistent. This is not your time. But you have to see. I didn't know what that meant. I couldn't make sense of it, but somehow it didn't matter. As I watched the doctors try to resuscitate me, I knew that this wasn't the end, not yet. There was something else waiting for me. And just like that, it happened. My consciousness was pulled somewhere, no longer in the sterile hospital room, but into a vast, empty space. The sensation of weightlessness was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I didn't need to breathe. I didn't need to think. I simply existed. In front of me, a field unfolded, green, endless, with flowers in every color imaginable. I could see for miles, but it wasn't a place. It was a feeling of peace. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at ease. There was no pressure, no work, no deadlines. And then a figure appeared beside me, tall, cloaked in light, though I couldn't make out the details of their face. They simply stood there, offering no explanation, just a presence that felt familiar. I didn't need to ask questions. The voice returned in my mind. Look at your life, Marie. See what you've built. See what you've lost. The landscape around me shifted. My life, my choices, the paths I'd walked, all of it played out in vivid flashes. The moments of success, but also the faces I'd left behind. Friends, family, relationships I'd neglected, all flashing before my eyes. The work I'd put above everything else. The way I'd shut out the people who loved me, thinking my career would fulfill me in ways nothing else could. The guilt was sharp, but there was no one there to judge me. Just the truth. I wasn't alone in this moment. The figure beside me, who never spoke but whose presence was undeniable, seemed to guide me through it. It wasn't a harsh judgment, just a quiet acknowledgement of what I had and hadn't done. I wasn't perfect, but I didn't have to be. Before I could process all of it, I felt myself pulled back. The peaceful field, the figure, the voice, all fading away. My body, still in that hospital room, was fighting to hold on. And that's when I heard the voice again, more urgently this time. It's not your time yet. You have more to do. Suddenly, I was back in my body. I gasped for air, my eyes fluttering open. The doctors, the machines, the beeping, all of it felt too real after what I'd just experienced. I was alive, but I wasn't the same. After the heart attack, everything in my life should have felt like it was slowing down, but instead it felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The peace I had experienced during my out-of-body moment in the hospital lingered for a while, but it didn't last. I thought I could just brush it off, go back to my routine, and pretend nothing had changed. But I couldn't. The images from that place, that strange field, kept haunting me. I kept hearing that voice in my head, "You have more to do." But what did that mean? And why did it feel like a warning? The weeks that followed were the worst I'd ever had. My work felt suffocating, but my drive to keep going only intensified. I pushed myself harder, pouring myself into projects, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that clouded my every move. Felt like the universe was closing in on me. Then, one evening, I was driving home from work, barely able to focus on the road. I felt it again, a pull, something invisible drawing me away from my thoughts, dragging me into a space I couldn't control. The darkness inside me seemed to grow, the voices louder, like the air around me had turned thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure how long I had been driving when I realized I was no longer on the road I knew. My surroundings were different, unfamiliar. The streetlights were broken, flickering like dying stars. The sky above me, dark and empty, swallowed any trace of light. There was no one else around, no sound except for the humming of my car's engine. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. No cars, no people, just emptiness. Felt like I had driven into another dimension, a place where reality no longer applied. And then I saw it. A figure, tall, shadowed, standing motionless at the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing. The figure didn't move, just stood there, its face hidden in darkness. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a lost pedestrian or someone needing help. But the feeling of pure terror in my gut told me it was something else entirely. I rolled down the window, my hands trembling. "Are you okay?" called out, my voice shaky. No response. Then the figure turned towards me. And that's when I saw it, eyes glowing red like two embers burning in the night. They weren't human eyes. They weren't anything I could recognize. The gaze pierced through me, freezing me in place. I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, my throat tight with fear. I should have driven away, but I couldn't. Something in me kept me rooted there, unable to tear my gaze away from those burning eyes. Then, in a voice that wasn't a voice but a feeling, it spoke. "You're already marked. You cannot escape. I felt the words vibrate through my bones, a cold shiver running up my spine. The figure stepped closer to my car, and as it did, I could feel it, this terrible sense of being pulled into something dark. It wasn't just fear. It was something worse, like my very soul was being siphoned away. Suddenly, the car shook violently. The air around me thickened, pressing against me, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The red eyes stayed locked on mine, and I felt like I was being dragged down, pulled into something deep and endless. In that moment, I understood. The mark. People had talked about it, whispered about it, but I had always thought it was just some conspiracy theory, something to scare people into submission. But now, in the face of that thing, I understood it wasn't just a symbol or a theory. It was real. I was marked. The figure stepped back, and as quickly as it had appeared, it disappeared into the night. I was left there, gasping for air, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I had to get out of there. I didn't think. I just slammed my foot on the gas pedal and drove, speeding through the darkened streets, not looking back. I didn't stop until I was home, heart still racing, mind spinning in terror. But when I looked in the rearview mirror again, my heart stopped. I saw something that chilled me to my core. The red eyes. They were there, reflected in the mirror, staring back at me. For days after the encounter with the figure, my mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside me. It wasn't just the trauma of what I'd seen, it was something deeper, more personal. I started seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices when no one was around. Everywhere I went, I felt watched, as though invisible eyes were tracking my every move. I couldn't walk down the street without glancing over my shoulder, thinking someone was following me. At work, I could feel the stares, even though no one said anything. Was it paranoia? Or was it something more? The real terror started when I began noticing changes within myself. Little things at first, like the way my skin felt. It was different, almost like it wasn't mine. My fingers would twitch involuntarily. My thoughts were darker, more violent, and I couldn't control them. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, as if I had been running through a nightmare I couldn't escape. I tried to brush it off. I told myself that it was just stress, that I was overreacting. After all, who wouldn't be rattled after an experience like the one I'd had? But then the dreams started. Terrifying, vivid dreams that felt like they were seeping into my waking life. I would dream about the figure, the one with the glowing red eyes, always standing just out of my reach. Its presence loomed over me like a shadow, always near, always watching. Every time I tried to escape, it would whisper in my ear, the words becoming more insistent. You cannot escape. You're one of us now. And then I would wake up, gasping for breath, as if the nightmare was still pressing down on me. The room would be dark and still, but the air felt thick, oppressive, like something was suffocating me. One morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I left my house early and drove to the mountains, hoping to clear my head, to escape the overwhelming fear that had taken hold of me. But when I reached the trailhead, something was off. There were no birds, no sounds of life, just silence. The air felt thick, almost as if nature itself had fallen still. I should have turned back, but my feet were moving on their own, dragging me deeper into the woods. As I walked deeper into the forest, I began hearing whispers. They were soft at first, just barely audible, like voices coming from all directions, floating just out of reach. My pulse quickened. The ground beneath me felt wrong, the earth unnaturally firm. I could feel something pressing in on me, closing in. And then I saw it. The same figure standing between the trees. It was no longer just a shadow, it was real, physical, blocking my path. Its red eyes pierced through the darkness like two fiery orbs, locking onto me with an intensity that made my knees buckle. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. "You've been chosen," it whispered, its voice low and guttural, like a growl that reverberated deep in my bones. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The figure stepped forward, its dark presence overwhelming. With each step it took, the air around me grew heavier, colder. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just a primal fear that rooted me to the spot. Then, a loud crack echoed through the trees, followed by a flash of light. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me standing alone, shaking, surrounded by an eerie silence. But I could still feel it. Presence. It was still there, watching me. And I realized something terrifying, that it was never going to leave me. Whatever had marked me, whatever had chosen me, was a part of me now. There was no escaping it. I stumbled back to my car, my hands shaking, my mind unraveling with each step. I drove home in a daze, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I locked the doors, closed the blinds, and crawled into bed, hoping for rest, hoping for peace. But there was no peace. No matter where I went, the whispers followed. The eyes followed. And I knew deep down that I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape, something far darker than I had ever imagined. I couldn't stop shaking. The fear that had taken root in me was no longer something I could push aside. It was a constant companion, always there, lingering like a dark cloud. My every step felt weighed down, as though something invisible was pulling at me. But it wasn't until one quiet afternoon that I truly understood what had been happening to me. It was the evening after another sleepless night filled with nightmares. I sat in my kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The whispers had gotten louder, more distinct, less like fragments of my imagination and more like commands. I would hear them when I was alone or even in the middle of a conversation, and every time they grew more insistent, more demanding. Follow the path. You have no choice. I stared at the clock on the wall, the ticking sound growing louder in my ears, echoing like a countdown. And that's when I saw it, a small, dark mark on the back of my hand. First, I thought it was just a bruise, maybe from all the stress, but the longer I looked at it, the more I realized it was something far more sinister. The mark seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, almost as if it was alive. I ran my fingers over it, and it was cold, cold in a way that made my skin crawl. The more I touched it, the more I felt like something was changing inside me. There was a sharp, biting pain in my chest, like claws were tearing through my insides. The realization hit me all at once. I wasn't just haunted by these visions or whispers. I wasn't just going crazy. I was being marked, chosen for something, something that went far beyond my understanding. It was then that I saw it. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. My reflection in the kitchen window, the image of myself standing there, still holding the mug, wasn't mine anymore. The eyes staring back at me were different, red, glowing like embers burning in a storm. My face had changed, the once familiar features now twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. In that moment, I understood what had happened. I had been marked by something ancient, something evil. The figure from the woods, the whispers in the dark, the strange marks on my body. Everything had led me to this horrifying conclusion. I wasn't just a victim of random circumstances. I was part of something much larger, something that wanted control. "You belong to us now," the voice said, echoing through my mind. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My hand trembled as I lifted it toward my face, and I could feel something inside of me, something dark and insistent, pushing me to embrace it, to let it take control. My thoughts were no longer my own. They were muddled with images of fire, chaos, and destruction. In a panic, I ran to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, hoping that it would snap me out of the trance. But when I looked up again, I saw it. The mark was now on my forehead, glowing faintly beneath my skin. And it was spreading. I stumbled backward, falling against the bathroom wall, gasping for air. The horror I felt was suffocating. My skin felt like it was burning, my mind spinning with impossible thoughts, and yet there was something alluring about it. The pull. The power. It was like a voice whispering that I could have it all, that I could finally be something more than I had ever been. "You can't fight it," the voice taunted. "It's too late. You've been chosen." My heart raced, but there was a strange calm that settled over me too. I knew I should be terrified. Hell, I was terrified. But there was also a strange sense of inevitability, as though everything had been building up to this moment. That mark on my skin was a sign, a symbol of my fate. No matter how hard I tried to resist, it was already too late. As the realization set in, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I felt the dark presence closing in around me, the shadows in my room growing deeper, more alive. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I was now a part of something that had been waiting for me, waiting for someone weak enough, desperate enough, to join its cause. I had been chosen. There was no going back. The days after the mark appeared were a blur. I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear and confusion, each hour dragging me deeper into a pit I couldn't climb out of. The whispering voices became constant, flooding my thoughts at all hours of the day. It wasn't just in my mind anymore, it was in my skin, in the air I breathed, in the very world around me. There was no escape. I tried to ignore it at first. I went through the motions, going to work, pretending everything was fine, but every time I looked in the mirror, the mark stared back at me. It was as if it was alive, like it was waiting for me to surrender to it. I started seeing things, shadows shifting in the corners of rooms, figures watching me from the windows, but when I turned to look, they were always gone. The feeling of being hunted, of being seen, was suffocating. At night, I'd lie in bed, trembling, listening to the whispers calling to me. "Come closer," they would say. "You cannot hide from us." I couldn't shut it out, couldn't push it away. And the more I tried, the more my body responded. My skin crawled, my pulse raced, my breath quickened, as if my very being was caught in the grip of something far more powerful than me. One night, in a fit of desperation, I turned to the only thing I thought might help: research. I grabbed my laptop, my fingers shaking as I typed in search terms: mark of the beast, demonic possession, spiritual warfare. I scrolled frantically through the endless pages of articles, each one more horrifying than the last. And then I found it. A name that chilled me to the core: the Order of the Marked. According to the texts, those who received the mark were bound to an ancient and malevolent force, one that controlled their every move, their every thought. It was a pact, a bargain that could never be undone. The mark wasn't just a symbol, it was a connection, a tether to something evil. And once you accepted it, once you allowed it to bind to you, there was no escape. You became a tool for its dark purposes. I read about the whispers, how they were not just random thoughts but commands guiding the mark toward their ultimate destiny. The more you resisted, the more powerful the force became, twisting your mind, pushing you toward despair. There was no getting out. Only those who accept the calling can truly be free, the text read. I wanted to throw my laptop across the room. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down, I knew it was true. Every part of my being told me this was what was happening to me. I was being consumed not by my own fears, but by something far darker, far older. But the terror didn't stop there. That night, I fell asleep at my desk, my body exhausted but my mind racing. When I woke, I was no longer in my room. I wasn't in my house. I was in a dark, cold space, an endless hallway stretching into nothing. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled forward, drawn by an invisible force, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Come closer, Marie," they beckoned. I reached out, my fingers brushing the walls, and the moment I did, everything changed. The ground beneath me cracked, and the world around me began to twist and warp. I could feel the presence, know the power, rushing toward me, an overwhelming, suffocating weight that filled the air with dread. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat, and I heard the voice again, but it wasn't just in my head anymore. It was outside me, surrounding me. "You cannot escape," it whispered, each syllable like a nail being driven into my mind. I screamed, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my feet were glued to the floor, my body paralyzed. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, cloaked in shadow. It was tall, towering over me, its face hidden beneath a hood. But I could feel its eyes, cold, unblinking, staring into my soul. My heart raced, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped, surrounded by this presence. The figure began to move toward me, its steps slow and deliberate, each one echoing in the hollow space. As it came closer, the whispers became clearer, the voices growing more frantic. "You must accept your fate," they pleaded. "You belong to the darkness." I closed my eyes, my breath shallow, waiting for the moment when it would take me. But instead, I felt a sharp, burning pain in my chest, like 1,000 needles being driven into my heart. I gasped for air, but it was as if the very air had turned to stone. And then, in the distance, I saw something that stopped my heart. The mark. It wasn't just on my hand anymore. It was spreading, crawling up my arm, across my body, and then I felt it on my face, on my neck. The mark was everywhere. And with it, I knew. I had no choice. I was already bound. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The figure was right in front of me now, its cold hand reaching out toward me. "Welcome to your destiny," it said, and the darkness swallowed me whole. Just as the darkness seemed to consume me entirely, the pressure in my chest grew unbearable, until suddenly everything stopped. The figure's hand was inches from my face, cold and oppressive. I could feel its power draining me, my body stiffening, my mind slipping away into oblivion. The whispers in my ears grew louder, filling my skull, pushing me to my knees. "You belong to us now," the voice boomed, and I felt my soul recoil, desperate for escape. But there was nowhere to run. I was trapped. This was my fate. Then, in the midst of the suffocating silence, something happened. It started as a faint light, flickering at the edges of my vision. First, I thought it was a trick of my exhausted mind. But it grew brighter, and I felt warmth spread through me, a warmth unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't a physical warmth, but something deeper, more profound, like my very soul was being bathed in a light that pierced through the darkness. The shadows around me began to retreat, as though they were being driven back by the light. And then I heard it. A voice, gentle yet powerful. "You are not alone." The words echoed in my heart, filling the emptiness within me with a sense of peace I couldn't explain. The oppressive grip on my chest loosened, and I found the strength to stand. The light intensified, and with it came a presence, so overwhelming, so pure, that I felt as though I was standing in the very presence of something divine. I couldn't see its source, but I knew it was there, surrounding me with love, comfort, and unexplainable grace. I wanted to fall to my knees in awe, but I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt embraced, like I had been found after being lost for so long. And then I heard the voice again, this time more distinct. "You are mine. You are free." The weight that had anchored me to that horrible place lifted. The figure in front of me, the one I had feared so much, began to shrink, its form twisting as if the light was dissolving it. The air around me was no longer thick with darkness, but filled with something so pure, so radiant, that I couldn't help but close my eyes against its brilliance. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and when I turned, I saw a figure bathed in the same blinding light. I didn't recognize his face, but I knew, deep in my heart, I was in the presence of Jesus. His eyes were full of compassion, love, and strength. He didn't speak, but I knew he understood the terror I had just endured. With a gentle touch, he spoke again, his voice like a balm to my soul. "You are not forsaken. The darkness does not have you." The light around us pulsed with life, and I felt a deep, overwhelming peace flood my being. The voices, the whispers, the fear, they were gone. I was no longer bound by the mark, no longer a prisoner to the darkness. "You are free, Marie," he said, and in that moment I knew it was true. Chains had been broken. Power that had once controlled me was no more. For the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath, and with it I felt alive again. Alive, not just in the physical sense, but in my heart, in my spirit. I was free. As the light began to dim, I found myself back in the empty building, standing alone. The shadows that had once consumed me were now completely gone. The air felt fresh, clean. I looked around in awe, as if waking up from a long, terrible nightmare. I didn't know how long I had been in that place, but I knew one thing for sure: I had been saved. I had been pulled from the abyss, and in its place was a peace that could never be taken from me. I walked outside, my steps light, no longer heavy with the burden of fear or darkness. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the world. I could feel the warmth on my face, and it was like a new beginning, a rebirth. As I stood there, bathed in the sunlight, I knew I had been chosen for something more. I had been saved, and I would never look back.